This is a direct attached storage device, in other words, a DAS system. It is an enclosure that you install multiple hard drives in and then connect the enclosure to your Mac or your PC using the provided Thunderbolt 3 USB-C cable. Inside the enclosure are 8 individual bays, as implied by its name, 8 bays for 8 hard drives. And those hard drives can either be 3.5-inch SATA internal hard drives, the old, spinning kind of hard disk that you're probably familiar with. It's been around a long time. Or you can also install 2.5-inch solid state drives as well. And by the way, you don't have to choose one or the other. You can mix the two together in this enclosure. And the drives can also be drives with different capacities and drives that are made by different companies as well. So not every drive in here has to be the same size or made by the same company. So here in a nutshell is how the ThunderBay 8 works. When you have drives installed and you connect the ThunderBay to your Mac or PC, those drives then appear on your desktop in your operating system, just like a regular external hard drive that you just plug directly into your computer. And you can absolutely use the ThunderBay 8 that way if you want to, but the main reason why photographers and videographers buy direct attached storage devices like this one is because you may group those individual hard drives together into one big massive hard drive. It just takes all of them and just, merges them all together into one big drive that then appears on your desktop. And you can use it just like a regular hard drive. You can save files to it, and you have just a massive hard drive for your Lightroom catalog, for all your raw photos, for all the videos that you're working on. How much capacity are we talking about here? Well, if you went out and bought 8 16 terabyte hard drives and put one in each bay and then merged all of them together into a single volume, you would then reach the maximum storage capacity of the ThunderBay 8, which is 128 terabytes, quite a lot of space. But in addition to getting one huge hard drive to be saving your photos and videos on, you also get security, because when the ThunderBay 8, through the software that it uses, which is a third-party app called SoftRaid XT, you get a serial number for it when you buy the ThunderBay. Through the software, when you create that single volume using multiple drives, you have the option of different levels of RAID. Now, I don't want to disappear down a rabbit hole talking about RAID because there's all different flavors of RAID, but the short and sweet answer here is that if you're just the average person like me and you're setting this up for yourself, RAID 5 is generally recommended to be the best compromise for storage and speed. And when you choose RAID 5, when you are combining these disks into a single volume, then if one of the hard drives in here fails, if you have a bunch of data on here, a bunch of photos and videos, and you're using it, and just all of a sudden one day one of the hard drives fails, well, you can just pop that dead hard drive out, buy a new one, put it in, and then everything will rebuild and you will be back in business without losing any data. And if that sounds far-fetched, I promise you it is not, because before I switched over here to the ThunderBay 8, I was using this, and this is a Drobo 5DT. I've used Drobos for many years, and over the course of my experience with Drobos, I replaced dead drives, I would say at least 3 times. It happens, like especially with spinning hard drives, they have a tendency to fail and they have a tendency to break. All right, so the back is pretty simple here. We have a security lock over here on this side in case you work like in an office, some kind of workspace, and you want to chain this thing down and keep someone from just picking it up and running away with it. And then on the other side, we have 2 Thunderbolt 3 USB-C ports, plus a display port for connecting a monitor. And the way you would set this up normally is you would use one of the Thunderbolt 3 USB-C ports here to connect the ThunderBay to your Mac or to your PC. And then you could use the other one for whatever you want. You could plug in a hard drive, you could plug in some kind of peripheral. You could also daisy chain another ThunderBay to this in order to increase storage capacity even further if you wanted to. Or you could also plug in a monitor. So this ThunderBay almost works like a Thunderbolt dock as well, because you could attach or rather input one monitor here, and then you could plug another monitor here. The ThunderBay can power 2 4K displays. So if you're like using a laptop and you want to run like one cable out to the ThunderBay here, well, you could then run 2 cables out to 2 4K displays if that is the kind of setup that you have. And then of course there is like a simple little power on and off switch here on the back, and then a pretty big fan here too. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this this fan later on. So in case you're curious to know how I have my ThunderBay 8 set up and configured, I currently have 4 14 terabyte hard drives in here that are made by Western Digital, and these are 7200 RPM NAS drives. These are drives that are specially made for NAS and DAS systems like this ThunderBay 8 here. So 4 14 terabyte drives adds up to 56 terabytes of space, which then dropped to 42 terabytes when all 4 drives were combined into a single RAID 5 volume. Now, the reason for the drop from 56 to 42 is because of how RAID works, is because when you save a file to a RAID volume, well, that data is then replicated and mirrored across all 4 drives. This is why you can just, pop a disk out and put a new one in if one fails without losing any data, because there's some duplication of data that's just automatically happening behind the scenes that you're not even exposed to, that you don't even know what's going on. But that's the reason for the reduction, because there's some extra space that's being carved out there so that RAID can be doing its thing in the background. So when you're setting up a DAS like this ThunderBay 8 here, it's always a good idea to be buying more storage than you need, not only so you have room to grow, but also because some of that storage is going to need to be used by the RAID software. And by the way, there is a great website that I found that has a nice calculator on it, a nice slider that you can use in order to determine how much space, how many drives you're actually going to need. And I'll link to that down below in the description if you would like to check it out. As far as setup and experience goes, I had no trouble at all getting up and running with the ThunderBay 8. I just installed the 4 hard drives in here. I connected the ThunderBay to my Mac Studio, installed the SoftRAID XT software, and then used that to configure and build a single RAID 5 volume using the 4 hard drives inside of here. If you are an Apple Silicon user, as I am with the Mac Studio, there is a little bit of like an extra step you have to do where you have to restart the computer and you have to modify some of your security settings a little bit. It's really not a big deal. It's pretty simple and easy to do. All told, it took like about 30 minutes for me to get the ThunderBay 8 up and running and for me to start saving data to it. So overall, mostly positive. The ThunderBay 8 has been working well for me. I migrated everything from my old Drobo over here over to the ThunderBay 8. I've been using it with Lightroom. I've been using it to edit 4K video. I've been editing 4K video directly off of the ThunderBay using Premiere and DaVinci Resolve. And as far as speed goes, I tested it using the Blackmagic Design disk speed tool, and I was getting somewhere on average like about 550 megabits per second read, and I think it was about 700. I'll put the numbers up here on the screen, but it was like right around 700 writes, something like that. More than enough for editing raw photos in Lightroom. And it's also fast enough, I was really happy to see, it's fast enough to be directly editing 4K video projects directly off the ThunderBay. So the ThunderBay 8 has been working well for me over the past couple of weeks. However, there are some things about it that I'm just not that crazy about, some things that I wish were different, some things that I feel like could be improved with the hardware. And there's also some important things to know if you are a legacy Drobo user like me, and you are thinking about migrating from a Drobo over to an OWC ThunderBay. There are some things that you should definitely know that are different. And I'll get to all of that in just a moment, but we need to pause for a second and talk about the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. I would bet everyone watching this video, including you, has something that you've always wanted to explore, something you've always wanted to learn more about. Well, Skillshare is the perfect place to do that. Skillshare was actually a huge help to me recently when I was designing a new website for myself, and I was using a new system that I'd never used before. I wasn't familiar with it. So I went to Skillshare and I looked it up, and lo and behold, I found a 3-hour class on how to do exactly what I needed to do, taught by Christopher Dodd. And it was fantastic. It was perfect. It contained everything I needed to know to help me get started. But hey, don't take my word for it. Check out Skillshare for yourself. The first 1,000 people to use the special link that is provided down below in the video description will get 30 days free. So you have 30 days to check out Skillshare for yourself at no cost to you, and check out everything that Skillshare has to offer. Thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. Okay, back to the OWC ThunderBay 8 here. I'd like to share with you now some of the things that I'm not that crazy about. And I'll admit, this is somewhat minor, but I'm not that wild about this latch, this front plate, whatever, I don't know, whatever you want to call this thing that goes on the front here. There is like very little affordance in the design of this plate here. Like, it's very tight. And it has to go into this enclosure just so in order for it to lock into place. And let me see if I'm getting better at this with practice. So let me see if I can get it, and I got it that time. So obviously I'm getting a little bit better with practice with this thing, but when I first started trying to, take this on and off, I kept doing it wrong, and it kept getting kind of like in weird angles and stuff, and it was like really hard to get back off when it goes in wrong. So I would just recommend taking your time with it and just being very careful with it, and just try not to force it too much. The other thing that I don't like about this plate is the key here on the front. I get why it's here. I mean, it's here so that, there is a security lock back here so that you could, lock the whole enclosure down to keep someone from picking it up and running off with it. And this is good here, to keep someone from just, popping the plate off the front and taking the drives out and running off with the drives and leaving the enclosure behind. But, this is a DAS. This is something that I would bet a lot of solo people like me are using, like in a home office, something like that. And this just also makes me a little bit nervous, having this key here and losing this key, because this is like a unique key here, for this enclosure. And if I were to lose this, or if like one of my kids were like to pull this out, and who knows what they would do with it? Well, that could be a little bit of a problem. So I would prefer, for there to be just, no key at all, or for at least to have the option of ordering the ThunderBay 8 without the key. Like, I wish this was just like a simple magnetic plate that just popped on and off the front of the enclosure. And actually, since it's sitting right here, like I'll show you, like the Drobo is just, it's just like that. And then you get access to everything in here. And obviously it's not quite as secure, but if it's just you, then I don't feel like you necessarily need all that. And the third thing that I'm not that crazy about with the ThunderBay 8 is a rather important difference between how RAID works on the ThunderBay 8 compared to my older Drobo. And by the way, this is the point I was referring to earlier at the beginning of the video. If you are a Drobo user and you're thinking about migrating your data over to a ThunderBay, this is something you'll want to know. So here's the deal. When you combine multiple hard drives into a single volume, thereafter, you cannot just simply add another hard drive to the ThunderBay to increase the size of that volume, to increase the capacity of that single volume that you are using, which is very different from the Drobo. Like, let's say, for example, that I had 5 hard drives in here, and one of the hard drives was only 1 terabyte. And I reached, the limits. I needed more space. I needed more room. Well, in the Drobo, I could just pop that 1 terabyte drive out, go out and buy like a 6 terabyte drive, whatever, put that in here, and the Drobo would automatically expand the volume. It would make the available disk space that I had larger without me having to reformat anything, without me having to do much of anything outside of just popping the drive out and putting in a bigger one. But the ThunderBay and SoftRAID XT software doesn't work that way. If you just put additional drives in here, those drives are going to appear on your desktop as like extra hard drives. There's no way to add those drives to an existing volume. So if you are purchasing a ThunderBay and you are also buying hard drives for it, it's important, to consider, to return to my point from earlier, not just how much space you're going to need for the amount of data that you plan to save and how much space you're going to need for, the RAID 5 configuration, but also how big of a volume do you need? Like, how big of a volume do you intend to build? How much space are you really going to need long term? Because once you get that volume set up, it's it's not exactly easy to expand it thereafter. Hey, so this is me in the future. I don't know what happened when I shot this video originally, but I totally forgot to mention 2 other things about the ThunderBay 8 that I don't particularly care for, including one thing that I alluded to earlier in the video, which is the fan. The fan is unfortunately rather noisy. At least in my opinion, it is. And the fan continuously runs. As soon as you plug it into a USB-C Thunderbolt port, it's just always on and it's always loud. And when you look around inside of this ThunderBay here, there really is like no sound dampening that I can see at all. I mean, it's pretty much just a metal box with a bunch of metal parts inside of it with a bunch of metal hard drives. It can make quite a bit of noise. So depending on how close this thing is to you, I mean, I would not recommend putting this like up on your desk, on your desktop. I mean, not that you really could, put this, on a desk anyway, because, it's pretty big, it's pretty bulky. So you would have to like, put it on the ground or someplace else. Which brings me to the next thing, and that is the cable. This is the cable that the OWC ThunderBay 8 comes with. And this is a 2.5-foot cable, which is rather short. I mean, it wouldn't be short, of course, if you have your PC or your Mac, like, on the ground, and this is just sitting directly alongside it. Well, that would be long enough in order to connect the two. But if you have like your Mac or your PC on top of your desk, like I do, like my Mac Studio back there is on top of my desk, and I definitely don't want this thing on the desk next to me. Well, this cord is nowhere near long enough for that. So I bought a new cable, and this is again an OWC cable. This one is Thunderbolt 4, but it is backwards compatible with Thunderbolt 3. This one is 6.5 feet long, no impact to speed at all. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to get an OWC cable, even though there are cheaper cable options out there, USB-C Thunderbolt 3 cables that you can find. I wanted to go with an OEM cable to ensure that my read-write speeds weren't affected because I've had bad experiences with cheaper cables in the past that just don't last, or the throughput on the cable just isn't that great. So before we close out this video, there is one really important point that I need to make, and consider this like a public service announcement if you don't already know this. If you're not already aware of this, I hope this is helpful. And that is the following. This is not a backup solution. Now, I know, I said earlier in the video, if a hard drive fails, you can just pop it out, you can put a new one in, no problem, no data is lost. The problem, however, is that if all the hard drives were to fail, if the enclosure were to get lost or stolen or someone ran off with it, or it was like a natural disaster of some kind, all of the data that you have saved in here would be lost unless it is backed up elsewhere, unless there is another copy of this data, preferably in a different state or in a different place, or even better, up in the cloud. Now that probably sounds expensive, right? Because you may have like terabytes of data inside of this enclosure. Well, the good news is, and this is part of the reason why I ended up buying another DAS instead of changing over to a network attached storage device, because cloud backup service providers like Backblaze, which is the company that I use, they have different pricing tiers and plans for NAS systems compared to DAS systems, because a DAS just appears on your desktop like a normal, regular hard drive. Like it's not recognized as being anything different. So you can use more affordable personal backup plans like the one that is provided by Backblaze, and back up however much data you have, as opposed to a NAS system, which can be much more expensive. Like your monthly bill can be much higher. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for being here. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please take a moment and give this video a thumbs up down below. I would appreciate it. And by the way, I totally forgot to mention this at the beginning of the video. Usually I would have said this a long time ago, but OWC did not pay for this video. They did not sponsor this video. They did not send me a ThunderBay. They did not send me the drives inside of here. No one sent me anything. I paid for everything that you see here, but I'm making this video here because I thought it would be interesting to other people, especially those of you who maybe, like me, maybe you're upgrading from an old Drobo, or maybe you're considering a ThunderBay for your local storage and you wanted to know more about it. Thanks so much for being here. Oh, and subscribe to this channel. If you have not already done so, please do. And if you would like to sign up for my weekly email newsletter, I put one of those out as well. That contains, updates and things from this channel and also other stuff that doesn't appear here on my YouTube channel that you may be interested in. So if you'd like to check that out, head over to todddominey.com. You can check out my website and sign up for my newsletter while you're there. And I'll put the link down below too. Lots of links in the description. Lots of things to check out down there. So anyway, thanks everyone. See you next time.